Hey, before we get started with today's episode, I want to let you know that if you're planning for retirement or aren't sure where to start, we have a helpful checklist for you. We put together a guide called your pre-retirement checklist and have made it available for free on our website. This detailed checklist covers things pertaining to cash flow, Social Security, Medicare, asset allocation, and living a purposeful retirement. The link to download the checklist is listed in the episode description. Or you can go to wiserinvestor.com, scroll to the bottom, enter your email address, and then you'll have access to your pre-retirement checklist. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement Podcast, where we cover financial topics such as retirement planning, tax planning, portfolio management, insurance, and estate planning, so you too can have a wiser retirement. I'm your host, Casey Smith, guiding you to financial success, are my co-hosts Brad Lyons and Matthews Barnett. Hey, guys.
Hi, Casey. How's it going?
So, my youngest son, he's 10 right now. He really likes space. Often I'll see him on our Apple TVs at home. He'll be on the NASA app, and he likes to see where the International Space Station is. And they launch rockets, I think, every 2 or 3 a week right now, between SpaceX and all the other companies that are private now. We've been to 2 launches. We went down for I think they called it Crew 2. That was both NASA crews. So SpaceX was launching into with NASA astronauts to the International Space Station, which is pretty cool. We got 10 miles away the first time, and the second time I learned about this area called the red zone, or the heat zone, and basically you're 4 miles from the rocket. I didn't feel any heat, but it was Florida. It was a little warm anyway, even at 2:20 in the morning. But the what a neat experience. If you ever have an opportunity to go down to Kennedy Space Center, I would encourage you guys all of our listeners to do that. You can't help but walk out of there feeling like a proud American and what we've been able to accomplish with science and space travel, and obviously what's to come going forward. But I say all that to say, I'm sitting in this bleacher, and it starts the countdown, right? And it's getting closer and closer, and the astronauts have been driven out in the Tesla. They get out and they wave, and so they've just been sitting on their backs for over an hour at this point. And you can't help but what do they feel? What do they feel? You think, hours, or probably thousands of hours of training. But, for the most part today, there's not a whole lot of buttons. I mean, computers are going up, taking them up. It's not like back in the old days where they attached a rocket to a Coke can and they had to virtually manually drive those things. But it's interesting just looking at what are they doing. And a lot of times I just see, they have these video cameras. You can see them. They're just sitting there on their backs, because they're tilted up at this point. And, you see them punching the screens every now and then. For the most part, they're just hanging out. And maybe they're like just super cool. And they're like, oh man, this is going to be awesome. But somebody there for the first time is going up. And they're thinking about all the liquid nitrogen, I believe, or liquid oxygen that's being poured in underneath them. You think, man, this thing explodes. But part of me goes, but they planned. I mean, everything that could go wrong, that they've done something. They planned for something, right? And not that going into space is anything like retirement, but there's some anxiety there. When we meet with people for the first time, they're say, hey, I want to retire. Sometimes it starts off with, can I retire? Help me do the math. How much do I need? And then other times it's like, okay, I'm going to retire. I'm pretty sure I've done the simple math and I can get going, but I'm not quite sure what the flight plan is, right? And so that's where we've come up with a retirement checklist. You can find it on the website. You can download it. And we did it basically like a rocket launch. Hadley here, in charge of our marketing, was very creative and came up with this T-5, 4, 3, 2, right? And has different listings. And so that's the theme for this quarter. The theme for this quarter is we're blasting off into retirement. And what a scary time to be retiring when you're especially looking at the markets. I mean, right as of today at this recording, there's still a war going on with the possibility that war spreads, right? So there's a lot of risk out there right now, and you have to have a plan. Even during the best of times when people retire, say, well, it's real easy to retire. It's really hard to stay retired 20 years later because of inflation, right? And rate of returns and not meeting expectations, things of that nature. I've seen a lot of people retire and they have they're using rate of returns of like 8% in their assumptions.
Yeah, history has been pretty good to us in the last 10 years or so relative to stock market returns. But to look at on a forward basis, those types of returns are probably a little unrealistic, and they should scale back their expectations probably. And even if we do have similar returns, by scaling back your planning, it gives you a cushion of having had higher returns than expected that match for your income needs then. So, utilizing a conservative return assumption for the future in your retirement is a good planning tool.
It's a lot more than just the investment returns. I think people place too much emphasis on that. It comes down to actually having that overall plan. You've got a bunch of assets, and what does that mean exactly? How do you actually use those to your advantage for cash flows in retirement is what it really comes down to.
Well, like those astronauts that are sitting in that space capsule, they have a plan. They know what the flight path is, okay? But what they've done also is in their consideration is they've gone through all the different scenarios that could happen, right? And have a small plan for each one, we'll say, to get them back on the main plan for the retirement or the space flight itself. So having a plan means also to consider all the different scenarios that could happen within a time frame of retirement of 30 years, hopefully, and in a planning, mechanism such as the way we go about doing our planning, we do consider different scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if all the different things that could occur in a lifespan of additional 30 years does occur? What does that look like to the plan? How do we monitor it, and how do we keep on track, to make sure that path, that retirement plan or that flight path for those astronauts, match up?
You think about 20 years ago, you probably retired with a pension, and so income replacement was pretty straightforward. I'm going to stop getting this paycheck. They're going to start sending me this other paycheck, and then I get Social Security on top of that. And maybe you've accumulated a few $100,000 in investments, but the math is pretty simple. The pension goes up with inflation, but that's not the norm today. The norm today is you've accumulated assets, or you need to accumulate assets to supplement Social Security. And then if you're a business owner and you sold your business, you had this income producing machine, which now is no longer there. So you've sold it at a certain value. How do you ensure that you don't run out of funds? And how are you the best steward for your wealth going forward? Especially for those families that have worked hard and have accumulated significant wealth. Sometimes you could get too conservative. So you're not building the legacy for your future or for your future generations. You're actually got it stacked underneath the mattress, and you're not going to gain any traction, or you've left people out or behind potentially.
It's a different mentality. I'd say that when we ask questions about people's expectations and concerns in retirement, probably the two biggest we hear, no longer having a paycheck and running out of money. It's a completely different mindset when you're no longer contributing and living off your own paycheck, but actually having to have the income from the investments you've saved up.
The term you used to hear most often associated with retirement was fixed income. Remember that? Retirees would always consider,
I'm on a fixed
right. income. Okay. You don't really hear that term as much anymore because of the replacement of the pension plan with the defined contribution plan or 401k plan, which means you may have a variable income going forward in the future. And how do you manage that and structure it in such a way that is be predictable, if not fixed at least?
Yeah, I wonder. Well, I will say, I'll add this. Something they always check is less stress, peace of mind. So if we're about to launch into retirement, I mean, yeah, we have a bucket list of things we want to accomplish, but we also don't want to have the stress that we might run out of funds, which goes back to what you were alluding to. All right, so let's kind of dive into our 5 topics that we're going to touch on this quarter. Something that's very important, part of a pre-retirement checklist should always be optimized cash flow. And so we'll certainly in our podcast this quarter focus on where money comes from in retirement. Mm-hmm. There's sources of different sources, but then there's also different times you take those sources, like Social Security. There's also an optimized way to take it for tax efficiency as well. So that's something that is very important is optimizing your cash flow. Also understanding how much is it going to cost you to live during retirement. Matthews tells me that's one of the most common questions.
Yeah. Hope you could tell me, or I don't know. So, it helps to not only have a pre-retirement budget to figure out what retirement could actually look like, but trying to focus on a lot of it really comes down to not comparing yourself to other people and other individuals and figuring out what your own retirement looks like.
When we were studying and putting together this download on the website, I realized that 90% of people do Social Security wrong, or potentially 90%, because there are a few exceptions. But a lot of people are taking Social Security early, which is just shooting yourself in the foot for many families. So that's part goes back to optimizing cash flow too. Is you don't have to not taking Social Security doesn't mean you're denying yourself income. There's just calculators today that help you figure out when to take Social Security, when to pull from other places, so you end up with a consistent, smooth income throughout retirement, but you're just grabbing things from different shells at different times.
Right.
And I think that's where good advisors come into play. Good advisors are going to tell you to delay Social Security because of the increase in payment.
There's a lot of misinformation out there, unfortunately, and you hear a lot of people just saying they claim early because they paid into it and they want it, or because they don't think it's going to be around. So
right.
You just got to be careful what you read.
Yeah. And also, too, the people that tell you to take Social Security because it won't be around are the same people watching Fox News infomercials, and they're telling you to buy gold, or some website, and they're telling you to subscribe to their newsletter. So they're using that fear to promote whatever it is making them wealthy. So you have to understand where the information comes from. I'll never forget several years ago now, Brad responded to an email I sent him. I think it was over our Christmas holiday, and I said, "Hey, look at this article in the Wall Street Journal. It was like
the
a
hedge
full
fund manager.
It was like a full page. And the hedge fund manager. I was talking about the value guys.
Oh, that's right.
They were talking about value stocks are going to in 2021 or be the stocks, and growth is going to fall by the wayside. And then I sent it to Brad and said, "Wow, they're very convicted and that value stocks are the way to go for 2021." And he responded back and goes, "Well, it was written by a value fund manager." I was like, "Oh, right. You're supposed to always go check to see who wrote the article to see what biases they have in the article."
I remember.
But yeah. Also too, that was an article I think I read. It was a web-based article though about the doomsdayer. Now he said there was a 30% chance of civil war in the United States. So he's still wrong about that. He just had the country wrong. And it's not a civil war, it's active aggression. But yes, you can't run a hedge fund unless you can convince people there's doomsday.
That's
coming.
right.
So, something else that I think eludes a lot of people, or people's understanding, is Medicare. This can get really complicated, and so we'll make sure that we have a focus on Medicare this quarter and helping people choose what's best for them. In fact, I think we should have a good guest for that one. Investment asset allocation. Now that's our sweet spot, Brad, right?
Yes, it is.
So investment asset allocation, you got to do something different in retirement than you do when you're in accumulation phase?
Well, accumulation phase, quite often it can be thought of as you're trying to maximize your return and accumulate as much assets as you can in the working years that you have and that you're contributing to that. So you're creating wealth during the accumulation years. And in retirement, what you're doing is you're managing that wealth, and you're managing it to a particular objective of payment of income throughout the period of time. Okay. So yeah, it's a slightly different, thought process and management style. We look at risk and return. We look at predictability. We looked at standard deviations. There's a whole measurements of things to look at when we're managing wealth for a retiree.
Other point is to retire with purpose, and this is, I guess, the feel good portion of the presentation, as I like to say. We did some hourly planning for a couple, a very interesting family. He worked at Lockheed Martin and Skunk Works, which is basically designing the next level of badass stuff for the military. But I think when I met him, he was 78 years old. And I said, well, when are you going to retire? And he said, my wife won't let me. And I just kind of laughed. And then next meeting, I meet his wife. She wouldn't let him retire because all his friends, when they retired, the year later, they were dead. So she was afraid of losing him. It was an act of love, not an act of, I need a paycheck. But he had gotten to the age where he was forced to take the pension. He's forced to pull money from a 401k. And then he's also getting a very good salary for designing badass stuff. And so I thought to myself, well, it's okay to retire. You just got to retire with a purpose. Like, we'll give you a couple of weeks to, sit in the recliner and watch TV and sleep in. But in the end, though, you got to have a purpose. We got to roll out of bed in the morning. The feet got to hit the floor, and you have to say, okay, I'm doing this today. And it could be a lot of things. I mean, we work with hundreds of families, and for some it's the grandkids. For some, it's a hobby. Met someone recently that's really into woodworking, big time, like up early, staying up late, focused on these different projects. But you got to keep your brain active in retirement. Just like when astronauts go to space, they don't just float around. I mean, that's probably cool for the first couple hours, right? But then after that, they have to be on exercise bikes. They're doing science experiments. And so it's just like in retirement. We can't just float around or else we're going to end up with some health issues. So it could be your golf game. It could be that you want to get your handicap down to a certain number. Maybe you want to win the club championship or your division. It could be for a lot of our pilots. It could be something to do with aviation. Doesn't require hotel rooms, right? It could be given back through different clubs. Could be joining Rotary or Kiwanis or doing something in your neighborhood to give back. But regardless, everyone should roll out of bed and have a purpose. Donald Miller would talk about leaving a legacy. He has this. I think it's a little crude, but he's actually written his obituary. And so when he gets up every single morning, he reads his obituary. So he wants to be known as what? Doing what? Right? That's what it says. And so it reminds him what's important that day. So then he goes down and starts working on his next book. And I'm sure he just had a daughter recently. So I'm sure he's rewriting that obituary a little bit because now he has a little different legacy he has to leave behind, right? So that's how we have to get out of bed in retirement. I think that's how we get out of bed before retirement too, but some of us are drug out by obligations and things that we have to do. I'm very fortunate that I hit the floor every morning and I know exactly what it is that I'm trying to accomplish today, and that's to bring financial success to my community. And I want everyone else to have that same purpose.
Well, there was a common thread that you mentioned, going through having a purpose, and that's maintaining good social contact with people. Okay, whether it's through continued employment or social or activities or volunteer activities or whatever the case may be, that you're remaining, social with other people and you're maintaining contact. And that's really important. You said we'll give you a couple of weeks on the lazy boy chair,
Right.
But after that, you get up and get social. Be social with people.
What's beneficial for a lot of people too, it seems like, is kind of stopping the daily grind, the long hours, and kind of transitioning to semi-retirement. So you kind of test the waters, kind of learn, more of the family life or hobbies and enjoying that versus the day-to-day grind every day, and starting to learn a little bit transitioning in retirement rather than just a hard stop and then trying to figure out, now what do I do with my life?
Yeah, very true. All right, guys. Well, I'm looking forward to this quarter. We're going to have a lot to cover, a lot of in-depth topics. We'll have some guests along the way, and let's go make it a good 3 months. Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you don't miss any new episodes. We would also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. We would love to hear from you. This episode was produced and edited by Lilton Moore.